Hello and welcome back to the Spiritual Sanctuary. I wasn't planning on doing another podcast today, but yesterday we lost a person who is not only an icon for a lot of people, but was someone that I remembered from the time I was a child. When I think about Dolly Parton, I don't just think about a music legend or all her awards or all her other things like that. I think about Appalachia. Think about where I'm from, growing up in Eastern Kentucky, listening to her music, visiting Smoky Mountains as a child, and then seeing a woman from the mountains of East Tennessee become one of the most recognizable women in the world without ever seeming ashamed of where she came from. And that's what I keep coming back to. Dolly made it okay to be seen. She made it okay to be feminine and funny and ambitious and colorful. Well, was she colorful and big, intelligent and loud and kind and completely herself? She seemed to understand that being visible didn't require you being someone else. And from those of us who grew up in Appalachia, that really matters. Dolly was from East Tennessee, and I was raised in East Kentucky. And we're not from the same town or even the same state. But if you are from Appalachia, you understand that the state lines don't really always define where home begins and ends. There's a shared culture that runs through those mountains, the music, the story, the food, the family traditions, the churches, the humor, the poverty, the pride, the resilience, and the complicated way the outside world sometimes sees us. People hear an Appalachian accent and often make assumptions before they know anything about you. They assume things about your education and your intelligence. They assume your beliefs and your backgrounds, or even what kind of future you're capable of making. When you grow up surrounded by those stereotypes, it's easy to believe that success means leaving parts of you behind. Maybe you should change your accent. I did in eighth grade when I moved from Eastern Kentucky to Winchester. And I thought Winchester, Kentucky was a big town. It's just outside of Lexington. I got made fun of because of the way I spoke. I had a very thick Eastern Kentucky accent. If you would actually go to the map in a state of Kentucky and you see that little tip at the end, that's where my house was, just right there. You could basically see Virginia, West Virginia, all the little areas through there. And after eighth grade of being teased and beat up and everything else, I decided that summer I was going to change my accent. I was going to change who I was. I wasn't going to talk about where I came from. I was going to become more polished, more acceptable, and less noticeable, less mountain, less redneck. That worked for me for a little bit. Actually, it worked for me a lot. I did go to Morehead State University, which is a mountain university, but I didn't go to U-Pike, which is the university where I was born. I didn't go to UK because it was too large. And I thought about EKU, but it was too close to home. And my mother, if you know Eastern Kentucky parents, they're very protective, especially of the girls. You have this idea of you go to college to get an MRS degree. That means you might be a teacher, you might be a nurse, but you're there to go get a husband, especially in 1989 when I went. I was told I was going to be a teacher. I went to be a teacher because my grandmother, who was born in Appalachia, she was only allowed to go to fourth grade because she was not seen as valuable. She was married off at like 11 or 13 years old. It was crazy because if not, she would starve to death. And so she told me that, I mean, she had like 20, 30, 40. I mean, the family was big. There was 7 kids, and each kid had 2 to 3 and sometimes 4 kids. And then they had grandkids and great grandkids and great grandkids now. And she always told me, she said, I want you to go to college and be a teacher. So one summer, Mom bought a set of encyclopedias, and Grandma took those encyclopedias, and I sat down and I read to her constantly. I I would teach her things and she would be so proud of me. She would learn new things and she just saw the world through my eyes. I never realized until the last few years what that really meant for her. She couldn't read and her world was so closed. There were so many things that happened after that that I understand now that she didn't understand because for there, your family's everything. I was ashamed of where I was from, and I would go up to grandma's over college, and I wasn't as embarrassed at that time. I was starting to find a little bit of myself. But then I ended up in a relationship and had a child and really began to hate myself, and that was part of who I hated, and I tried to erase who I was. But, getting back to who we were talking about, Dolly never seemed interested in doing that. She was enormously successful while remaining unmistakably Dolly Parton. She didn't erase her roots. She carried them with her. She made stories, and she told stories about people she grew up with and around and the experiences that shaped her, the poverty her family lived through, and the love that existed alongside it. And she didn't treat Appalachia as something she had escaped. She treated it as part of who she was. I'm thinking back to Grandma, and I don't really remember discovering Dolly Parton. She was just always there. Hee Haw, I remember clogging when I was younger. I remember Minnie Pearl. I remember um, the Dolly Parton show, watching her on TV. And when I was younger, her and all the other singers were part of the soundtrack of my childhood. Their voice was familiar, their face was familiar, and she was just Dolly. But now, as an adult, I kind of look back on all of it differently. Dolly didn't feel like someone saying, I got out of Appalachia like I did. I said, I got out of there. I want out of Kentucky. Never gotten out of Kentucky. If anything, gotten closer to southern part of Kentucky and actually feel more like Nashville's my home now. But she always said, look at this place. Look at the crafts and the music and the stories and the people, and look at where I come from. And she always found something to celebrate. I didn't have those words as a child, but I believe that some part of me, I took in that message anyway. She was loud and she had an accent and she did not blend in. She was extremely feminine. She was extremely smart. Business wise, you couldn't beat her. She knew how to laugh and she never shrunk. And girls, especially little girls from there, notice these things, even when we don't know we're noticing. As I grew older, I began to appreciate Dolly in a different way. She made it okay to take up space. Many times we're taught often to become smaller versions of ourselves, to learn not to be too loud or too ambitious or emotional, not to be too anything, and especially opinionated. And Dolly ignored all of that. She wore the hair and the rhinestones. She laughed loudly. She dressed exactly the way she wanted to dress. She was feminine without apologizing and powerful without pretending that her femininity made her less intelligent. See, and another thing that I wish I'd learned from Dolly, I learned it when I was younger. I lost it as I aged. And I found it a few years ago again, was that she didn't believe that being fully herself required making anyone else smaller. That's where I think her example moves from having confidence into love. As I get older, I become more vulnerable and I begin to think that the greatest things that we can learn is how to be ourselves without needing everyone else to become like us. I never really was the person who was like, oh, I want to find people just like me. I always liked being different. And that kind of difference was a confidence. But I never understood that that's kind of where I was. I was comfortable enough with who I was. I didn't want people to dress like me or think like me or do things that I did. But I also wanted them to be familiar and kind of like me, adjacent. But Dolly said you can make room for all, not just the adjacent ones. And she seemed to love everyone. Of course, I didn't know her personally, but from the time I was a child, she just always seemed kind and nice, and there was something approachable about her. She was one of the most famous women in the world, one of the richest women in the world, and she felt like somebody who'd sit down next to you and ask you about your family. She made room for everybody, and she was love, not demanding people to be just like her, not asking people to shrink. She just loved people for who they were. And she turned love into action. We talk about love constantly in spiritual places. She talks about being a Christian and sending love to everyone. And love has to become something, it has to be something that we can see. And she put books in children's hands and food for people. And she made phone calls and she helped people from Tennessee all the time. She felt like love was an idea, but she felt like it was very powerful when she could put it into action. She remembered where she came from. She gave back. She supported children. She supported communities. She supported education, which is why I was always pulled to her, from people who needed help. And that matters to me because that's Appalachia. We get the stereotypes of being uneducated or backwoods or racist or hateful, but really, we were not that. We help people. Families helped each other. And people, I don't know, you could talk to people, go, hey, I need this fixed, and they'll help you, or I'm hungry, and they'll help you. I never experienced the poverty. I was lucky enough. I never experienced it firsthand. But I did see it around me. And I remember my mom telling me never, ever to make fun of anyone for what they wore, what they ate, what they didn't have, where they lived, what they look like, or anything else. I remember getting into so much trouble in elementary school because I was standing up to teachers that I thought were bullying kids who were poor. And we didn't have special education at the schools where I was up there, and the way kids were treated. And I didn't understand. I just knew I didn't want to be treated that way. And I was, my dad was called to school constantly for me having to, for me getting in trouble for helping other kids. I remember this one time, this one kid, I didn't understand. My mom would bring him home with us sometime. I knew his mom and dad had died in an accident, but I didn't know his grandmother was an alcoholic and was mean, and sometimes he didn't have food. I just knew that she would take him and he'd come stay with us for a while and we'd have fun. And I tried to teach him to read. And one day the teacher was really mean and telling me to be quiet. I remember standing up, going, "Well, if you do your job and teach him how to read, then I wouldn't have to do it." I think I was like in third grade. I don't know where I lost a lot of that. I know the bullying when I moved didn't help, but it's not always easy. And I was always there to help people, and then I got cynical as I got older. And then I found my husband, who's from East Tennessee. I swore I would not date somebody from the country or somebody that wasn't educated. I got that snotty attitude. And then I met my hubby, big old mountain boy from Tennessee. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. He's the type that if you need help, you're there. He's there. And he does what he can. And he takes care of me. And my old self in college would be like, "Oh, you're letting a man take care of you. You're not holding your own." Well, honey, I held my own. And I proved myself. And it's time now for me to rest. I always think about her with her husband, Carl. He always stayed in the background and supported her. My Sam is the same way. He supports me quietly. And I never know what it is that I feel like I can do to make him know how much I love him. There's something especially emotional for me because now I just kind of live north of Nashville. I grew up in Eastern Kentucky listening to her. I went to Dollywood as a child. I knew the songs and the voice. Hard Candy Christmas was probably and Islands in the Stream with Kenny Rogers. Oh my gosh, I would sing that song. And my journey's nothing like Dolly's at all. She was wonderful. But I think about the geography of it and the mountains behind me and Nashville in front of me. And a little girl from Eastern Kentucky who grew up hearing Dolly's music. And I'm now teaching and writing and speaking and doing spiritual work and creating a life that I could have never imagined. People like Dolly expand our understanding of what is possible. We show Appalachian girls that we didn't have to be embarrassed by where we come from. We can grow. We didn't have to get married. We could get married. We didn't have to have kids. We could have kids. We could become educated. We could have careers other than teachers and nurses. And there's nothing wrong with those, but those were the options. I remember wanting to be in band. It was told I couldn't play drums because I was a girl. They handed me a clarinet, and that lasted about a month. I remember going to graduate school and wanting to study history and was told by university, not my alma mater, but another one, that girls don't have master's or graduate degrees in history. You could do social studies and teach, but that's it. Because we couldn't understand anything more than that. And then, especially being someone from Appalachia and being a single mom and being a single mom with a biracial child. I think that's a part of why I was so angry for so long because I kept going straight into the resistance of different things. And Dolly taught me a lot, and I only realized this about a decade ago. When I was younger, I remembered, and as I said, I lost it before. But she taught me that intelligence and femininity is not opposites. I can be smart and feminine. That kindness and strength are not opposites. I can be kind while I'm still being strong. And that being visible and being loved are not opposites. I remember being told that I was to sit down and shut up. I was to be seen and not heard. And I remember fighting that. I remember watching 9 to 5 and I'd prance around, and I swore I was going to walk in and take charge. And she showed us that women could walk into a room and we didn't have to apologize for being there. And she also taught us that when you're finally comfortable with being yourself, you can help other people feel safe enough to be themselves too. So when I think about Dolly, I not only think about a singer, but I think about a little girl from Eastern Kentucky walking through Smoky Mountains, the mountain music, my grandpa playing bluegrass and the banjo, and family stories and accents that people sometimes judge. And I think about all the girls have been told in one way or another that they need to change who they are before the world will take them seriously. And I think about Dolly and the hair and the glitter and the laugh and her intelligence, her kindness and her love, and the mountain that she never tried to erase. And she made it okay to be seen. So be seen, be yourself, remember where you came from, and love people enough to let them be themselves too. And from one Appalachian woman to another, thank you, Dolly. Thank you for showing girls from places like Eastern Kentucky and East Tennessee that our beginnings are not something we needed to hide. And thank you for reminding us that there's beauty in these mountains and talent in these mountains and wisdom in these mountains and people that are worth seeing. And thank you for being the most beautiful person in this world. Rest well. Hopefully, I'll see you again one day.